The alien queen, known as Zeyara, stood atop the command deck of her flagship, her piercing eyes scanning the expanse of the galaxy. Her once unwavering confidence had begun to waver, a faint sense of unease creeping into her heart. For centuries, she had been a leader among her people, commanding armies, conquering planets, and enforcing her will with the ruthless efficiency that only a queen of her stature could achieve. Yet today, something was different. Today, something beyond her understanding was calling to her. She had received a message, an invitation from a species she had never encountered before: humans, a race that, from the reports of her scouts, had been primitive, struggling to survive on their dying world. A race that had, until recently, been of no consequence in the grand scheme of the universe. But now, their leader, a human named Gabriel, was calling her out by name. And with those words, he offered her something that neither her people nor her vast military could ever have predicted. "Come to Earth, Queen Zeyara," the message had said. "You have a place here, with us. We need you. You are the one who will bring us the future we desire." The word hung in the air, the strange gravity of them pressing on her chest. Why? What was so special about her? Why was a mere human asking for her presence? It was an odd request, one that made her curious yet wary. She could no longer ignore it. The universe had changed, and she had to find out how. The ship's massive hull hummed as it shifted toward Earth, her personal guard of elite warriors surrounding her at all times. Zeyara felt the eyes of her soldiers on her, their devotion unwavering. She could sense their anticipation, their readiness for battle, if needed. But Zeyara, the proud and mighty queen, wasn't sure what kind of battle she was preparing for. What did this human leader want from her? The very idea of her leaving the stars to visit a primitive planet was almost laughable, but there was something about the message that made it impossible to ignore. As the ship approached Earth, Zeyara found herself staring out of the viewport, her thoughts racing. She had conquered countless worlds, her presence spreading fear among her enemies. But this human, this Gabriel, had done something no one had managed before. He had made her question everything. They had arranged to meet on neutral ground, away from both her people and his, a barren landscape on Earth, chosen for its isolation. Zeyara had descended from her ship, her mind whirling with questions. The atmosphere of the planet was thick, the air heavy with moisture, unlike anything she had ever encountered. It felt suffocating and unfamiliar, and yet it felt like the beginning of something she could not predict. She was escorted by a small group of humans, their eyes wide with awe, but they didn't speak. They simply led her through the thick vegetation until they arrived at a clearing where a figure stood waiting. Gabriel. He was taller than the humans she had encountered before, his posture commanding. Yet there was something in his gaze, something far too calm for a leader who was about to meet an alien queen. He smiled at her, an unexpected warmth in his expression that did not fit the stereotype of an earthling. Zeyara was taken aback. She had expected him to bow, to show deference, or at the very least, to be filled with fear. But no, he stood there, as if he had been waiting for her for years. "Queen Zeyara," Gabriel said, his voice firm but gentle. "I've been waiting for you." Zeyara narrowed her eyes. How could he be so composed, so confident? She studied him carefully, noting his calm demeanor, his poised stance. And yet, the words that followed caught her off guard. "You are the mother we have been searching for, the one who will lead us to a future beyond the stars, a future where humanity will rise, together with you." The queen blinked, her mind scrambling to make sense of what he had just said. "Mother," she repeated. "What do you mean, mother?" Gabriel's smile faltered for a moment, as though trying to find the right words. He gestured toward a group of humans standing in the distance, their eyes filled with hope. "We've been fighting among ourselves for too long. You, your strength, your wisdom, will unite us. You will be the one who brings us together, the one who makes us whole again." Zeyara was speechless. The humans were asking her to do the impossible. They wanted her to be something she had never been, something that made no sense to her, a mother to these fragile, chaotic creatures, a queen of war and power, now to become a symbol of unity and peace. The thought was foreign, almost laughable, and yet she could see it in their eyes. The belief, the hope, the desperation. They were looking at her like she was a savior. But she was no savior. She was a queen of war. She was a conqueror. And she had never been asked to protect a people, much less to love them. Gabriel stepped forward, his voice low but insistent. I know this is difficult to understand, Queen Zeyara, but this is our only hope. We are on the edge of extinction. And you, whether you believe it or not, you are our salvation. For the first time in her life, Zeyara felt something she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. She had always been sure of herself, sure of her purpose. But now, faced with the pleading eyes of these humans, something inside her stirred. Something deep, something she had never known before. She turned away from Gabriel, her eyes scanning the horizon. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of Earth's wild terrain. It was so different from the sterile halls of her empire. Yet the more she stood there, the more she realized she could not turn away. There was something about this planet, something about this leader, something about these humans, that felt like destiny. Zeyara took a deep breath, preparing herself for what would come next. She was not sure if she was ready to accept this strange new role, but in the depths of her heart, she knew that her journey had just begun. The universe had changed, and now, for the first time, she was uncertain of what the future would hold. Zeyara sat in silence as the human leader, Gabriel, continued to speak about his vision for the future of his people. His words were filled with hope, but they did nothing to alleviate the deep uncertainty that gnawed at her mind. The humans around her had been clear. They believed in her, trusted her, even saw her as a mother figure. But she was no mother. She was a queen, a conqueror, a ruler born from the ashes of countless battles. To think of herself as a nurturing figure was both foreign and unsettling. Yet there was something undeniable in the way they looked at her, something that made her wonder if perhaps there was more to this strange request than mere desperation. Gabriel had offered her a place among them, not as a conqueror, but as a leader, one who would unite the fractured human factions. The weight of this proposition pressed heavily on her, heavier than any crown or battle armor she had ever worn. She was no diplomat. She was no healer. But as she sat there in the heart of this alien world, surrounded by creatures so different from her own kind, Zeyara realized that perhaps this was the greatest test she had ever faced. Her mind wandered as she walked the unfamiliar human city the next day. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered in her travels. While other civilizations she had conquered were sprawling metropolises filled with towering structures of metal and stone, this place felt alive. The streets were vibrant, the buildings seemingly integrated with the landscape, made from materials that looked organic, as if the world itself had grown them. Everywhere she looked, there was evidence of human ingenuity, but also their struggle. Children playing in the streets, families gathered in markets, old buildings standing side by side with newer structures. It was chaotic and beautiful in a way she had never anticipated. She was accompanied by Gabriel, who walked beside her with an air of calm assurance that only deepened her sense of unease. How could someone so unassuming lead these people to greatness? He was not a warrior. He was not a conqueror. He was simply human. The thought lingered in her mind as they passed through the streets, a mixture of awe and confusion swirling in her chest. Despite their primitive technology, despite the ragged edges of their world, there was something undeniably resilient about these humans. They had faced their own struggles, their own wars, yet here they were, still standing. And now, they sought her help. "Do you ever wonder," Gabriel said as they walked, his voice breaking through her thoughts, "how we got here? How we reached this point?" Zeyara turned her gaze toward him. There was a faraway look in his eyes, as though he were searching for something beyond the present. She had always been one to focus on the now, on power, on the next conquest, the next battle. But for Gabriel, there was something more, something intangible that guided his every action. "I've seen many worlds," Zeyara replied, her voice measured. "I've seen civilizations rise and fall. I've seen them destroy themselves from within. Why should your species be any different?" Gabriel smiled, but it wasn't a smile of arrogance. It was a smile of understanding, of acceptance. "Because we're not done yet. We still have a chance to change, to grow. And that's why we need you. You've conquered worlds, Zeyara. You know the cost of destruction, but you also know the cost of standing still. We want to move forward. Together." She stared at him, trying to find the hidden motives behind his words, trying to sense if there was something more he wasn't telling her. But there was nothing. Nothing except the raw, vulnerable honesty in his eyes. It unsettled her. No leader she had ever encountered had spoken to her in such a way. No one had ever made her question the very foundation of her power. The days that followed were filled with briefings, meetings, and diplomatic discussions with human leaders. They spoke of alliances, of the future they wished to build. Zeyara listened, her mind distant. She had always been a ruler of action, not words. She had never been one for speeches or promises, and yet here she was, being asked to guide these people towards something that felt so foreign to her. The more time she spent among them, the more her skepticism turned to something else. Curiosity. These humans were fragile, yes, but there was a fire within them, a spark of defiance, a will to survive that reminded her of her own people in their early days. She had often wondered what it would be like to see a civilization rise without the constant threat of war and destruction. Perhaps this was her chance to find out. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Zeyara stood alone on the balcony of her temporary quarters, overlooking the city. The sky above was dark, filled with stars that seemed so close, so tangible. It reminded her of her own home, the vast stretches of space that had once felt so familiar, so comforting. But now, everything seemed different. The universe felt smaller, and for the first time in her life, she felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Gabriel joined her, his presence not announced, but somehow expected. He stood beside her, his gaze also directed toward the heavens. For a long while, neither of them spoke. There was nothing more to be said, nothing that could be said to change the reality of the situation. They were both at a crossroads, but Zeyara couldn't yet bring herself to make the decision. Could she truly lead these people? Could she embrace this new role, this unexpected future? "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Gabriel said quietly, breaking the silence. "What comes next?" Zeyara turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. His expression was unreadable, but there was an understanding there, one that only deepened her inner conflict. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice low. "What if I am not the leader you need?" Gabriel's answer was simple, but it held a weight that no words could truly carry. "Then we'll face it together. But you are not alone, Zeyara. You never were." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. In that moment, she understood that this wasn't just about her power or her ability to conquer. This was about something far more complex, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But for the first time in her life, she wondered if perhaps she didn't have to face it alone. The days on Earth began to blur into one another for Zeyara. Each new experience brought with it a wave of unfamiliar emotions, one she had long since buried beneath the weight of war and conquest. She had always known exactly where she stood, on the battlefield, in the midst of strategy, power, and control. But here, on this fragile world, surrounded by creatures she could barely understand, she felt a growing unease, a dissonance between who she had been and who she was being asked to become. She had thought that by now, the decision would come to her clearly. She had expected a moment of undeniable clarity, where the weight of her responsibility would settle into place, and she would know exactly how to proceed. But it wasn't happening. She found herself more uncertain than ever, torn between the life she had known for centuries and the strange new path that had appeared before her, full of unfamiliar potential and danger. The humans she had been entrusted to lead were a curious lot. Despite their wars, their struggles, their divisions, they held a resilience that she had never seen before. She had witnessed the hunger for peace in their eyes, the desperate yearning to unite and transcend the chaos that had plagued their species. And yet, there were moments when she saw something else, something dark. The distrust that lay beneath the surface, a skepticism in their eyes when they looked at her, as though they too were wondering what exactly this strange, powerful being from the stars was capable of. Zeyara spent her days observing, listening, and trying to understand them, but it wasn't easy. Every time she thought she might be making progress, she was reminded of the vast gulf that separated her from them. How could she, a queen who had ruled with an iron fist, understand the complexities of their emotions? How could she, a creature of war, possibly become the mother they believed her to be? Then, without warning, the first test arrived. It began as a ripple of tension, a minor conflict between two of the human factions. Zeyara had seen it before in other races, small disputes that would grow into larger battles if left unchecked. But this time, there was a difference. She was supposed to be their leader, their unifier. She was supposed to be the one who could prevent these conflicts from spiraling into chaos. The weight of the expectation settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, stifling and suffocating. Gabriel approached her that evening, his face drawn with worry. "It's happening," he said, his voice low. "The factions are about to go to war. If we don't do something now, it'll tear this alliance apart." Zeyara looked at him, her mind racing. This was it. This was the moment when everything she had feared would come to pass. She had been placed here not just as a figurehead, but as a force of unity. And yet she didn't feel the strength she had once carried with ease. She felt lost. Why would they fight? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Why, after all we've been through? After everything I've tried to build? Gabriel's eyes softened, but there was no pity there, only an understanding that Zeyara herself hadn't come to grips with yet. "We're not perfect, Zeyara. No one is. But that doesn't mean we can't learn to move past our differences. If we fight now, it will only prove that we never truly had the strength to change. But if we stay true to our vision, we can build something stronger, something lasting." Zeyara felt the weight of his words. She had been a queen who had built her empire on the ruins of others. She knew the power of force, of overwhelming strength. She had always been able to bend others to her will, to make them submit to her dominance. But this was different. She wasn't here to break them. She was here to lead them, to heal their fractures, to teach them how to stand together. The very thought made her feel exposed, weak even. As they made their way to the meeting hall where the leaders of the warring factions had gathered, Zeyara couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. It was unlike anything she had ever faced before. The political intrigue of her own people, the silent battles of influence within her council, those were games she knew well. But this was human. This was raw and unpredictable, and it terrified her. The room was tense, filled with representatives from every faction. Their eyes flicked nervously to the towering alien queen who now stood at the center of the room, her presence demanding attention. Zeyara could see the doubt in their faces, the skepticism that clouded their judgment. They didn't know her. They didn't understand her. They had no reason to trust her. And yet here she was, standing as their last hope. She had spent years making decisions that had shaped the lives of millions. But never before had she been asked to make a decision like this. She had always been a queen who commanded respect, not one who earned it. But now, in this room full of humans, she realized that respect would be the hardest thing to command. The discussions were heated, words flying back and forth, accusations, old grievances, and promises of retribution. The air was thick with tension, and Zeyara could feel her patience beginning to wear thin. She had dealt with political unrest before, but nothing like this. Nothing this fragile, this volatile. Finally, Gabriel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "Enough," he said, his tone firm. "We are all here because we believe in something greater. In unity. In peace. We cannot afford to let our differences destroy what we fought so hard to build." For a moment, there was silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of Gabriel's words hanging in the air. But it wasn't enough. The factions were too far gone. They were too broken. And Zeyara knew that the only way to bring them together was with the one thing they feared most. "You want peace?" she asked, her voice cold and commanding, carrying the weight of authority. "Then I will give it to you. But understand this. Peace does not come without sacrifice." The room fell quiet, the gravity of her words settling over the group. She was no longer speaking as a queen of war, but as something else entirely, a leader who was willing to fight for something greater than herself. She had taken her first step, even if it was a step she hadn't wanted to take. It was then that she realized something. She wasn't just here to be a mother. She was here to show them the true cost of peace. She was here to teach them that in order to build something new, something lasting, sacrifices would have to be made. And that in itself was a lesson she had learned the hard way. As the human leaders reluctantly agreed to her terms, Zeyara felt a strange sense of accomplishment. It wasn't the victory she had known before, the crushing, decisive triumph of war. But it was a victory nonetheless, a victory that came not from force, but from something far more complex and fragile: trust. And though she was unsure if she was ready to accept it, she realized that in this moment, she had become something she had never imagined she could be: a leader of peace. Zeyara sat on her throne, her fingers lightly resting on the armrest, but her mind was far from the present. The weight of her crown, though physically absent, felt heavier than ever. The victory she had won in uniting the factions had come at a high cost, far higher than she had anticipated. Despite the fragile peace she had managed to broker, doubts lingered in the air, thick as smoke. She knew the cracks in their unity hadn't been fully sealed. The tension between the factions simmered just below the surface, like an unspoken promise of future conflict. The worst part, however, was that she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, monitored, judged, and that the peace she had fought so hard to forge might shatter at the slightest wrong move. Gabriel, ever the optimist, seemed to believe that the worst had passed. He had reassured her countless times that the path ahead would grow smoother with time, that the humans would adapt to their new reality. But Zeyara couldn't forget the whisper of rebellion she had sensed the moment the factions reluctantly agreed to her terms. She had seen their faces, those who had not accepted her leadership with the same level of trust as Gabriel, those who had only agreed out of fear or sheer necessity. Her thoughts were interrupted when one of her trusted advisors entered the room. He was one of the few who had followed her from her home planet, a loyal warrior, skilled in both strategy and diplomacy, though his methods often bordered on ruthless. He approached her cautiously, his step soft, as if the very air around her held an oppressive weight. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice barely a whisper, though the concern was clear in his tone. "There are rumors circulating within the council, whispers of betrayal. There are some who feel that your leadership is not truly their path to salvation." Zeyara's eyes narrowed, her gaze sharpening. She had known this would come. She had expected it, even. The humans were not like her people. They were not bound by a singular loyalty. They were complex, driven by emotions, fears, and hopes that often conflicted with one another. In her previous life, her empire had been held together by fear, by the iron grip of power. But here, on Earth, she had to hold them together with something far more delicate: trust. And trust was the hardest thing to maintain. "Who dares question my leadership?" she asked, her voice low but laced with authority. The advisor hesitated, then bowed his head slightly. "It's not a single individual, my queen. It's a faction, the one closest to Gabriel. They fear your influence is growing too strong. They see you as a threat, not as a savior." Zeyara felt a cold, sharp pang in her chest. This was what she had feared, and it had come faster than she had anticipated. Gabriel's faction, those who had been the most eager to embrace her leadership, were now turning their back on her, afraid of her power. They saw her as the unspoken ruler of their world, the one who could tip the delicate balance of power in her favor if she so wished. She knew this game of politics well, and it was a game she had always played to win. But this was different. These were humans, unpredictable, fragile, and far more dangerous in their unpredictability than she had imagined. "Bring them to me," Zeyara commanded, her voice cold. "I will speak with them, personally." The advisor nodded and quickly departed, leaving Zeyara to her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. If she wasn't careful, the fragile peace she had fought so hard to build would fracture. Her mind raced as she prepared herself for the confrontation ahead. She had not come to this world to be loved, nor to be adored. She had come here to lead, to give them a future that they could not build on their own. But what was the point of leading if they would never truly accept her? What was the point of saving the species if they refused to see the strength in unity? When the representatives of Gabriel's faction arrived, Zeyara stood tall, her expression unreadable. They entered the room with careful steps, their faces a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Gabriel was not with them, and for a moment, Zeyara wondered if he had sent them here to test her resolve, or if he himself was too afraid to face her. The leader of the faction, a man named Nathaniel, stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark eyes hard and piercing. Despite the respect he tried to project, Zeyara could see the subtle signs of doubt in his posture, the way he kept glancing at the others in his group, as if seeking confirmation, as though he feared standing alone against her. "Your Majesty," Nathaniel began, his voice cautious, but resolute, "we have come to speak the truth. There are those among us who no longer believe you are the path to salvation. Your power grows too strong, and with it, our fear. The people do not follow you out of trust. They follow you because they have no other choice." Zeyara's eyes flashed, but she said nothing at first. She let the words sink in, feeling the weight of them settle into her bones. This was not a mere political challenge. It was a challenge to her very being. They feared her. They feared what she could do if she chose to wield her power. And in that fear, there was a cold truth. She was no longer simply the alien queen. She had become something else in their eyes. Something dangerous. "And what would you have me do?" Zeyara asked, her voice soft, but sharp. "Would you have me become weak, let you tear apart the peace I've worked so hard to create? Would you have me step aside and allow the chaos to consume everything we've built? Tell me, Nathaniel, what is your vision for humanity?" The room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with the weight of the unspoken. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering toward the other members of his faction. But no one spoke. Zeyara could feel the pressure mounting as they struggled with their own doubts, their own fears. This was not just a matter of political power, it was a matter of survival. "You have two choices," Zeyara continued, her voice growing more forceful. "You can continue to fear me, or you can choose to trust me. Because if you choose fear, then there will be no peace, no unity, only destruction." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. The silence stretched on, longer than she anticipated, and for a fleeting moment, Zeyara wondered if this was the end, if this fragile peace she had created would crumble beneath her. But then Nathaniel spoke, his voice low, but steady. "We will follow you. For now. But know this, Queen Zeyara, if you ever use your power to force our hand, we will no longer be allies. We will be enemies." Zeyara met his gaze, unblinking. "Then let it be known, Nathaniel," she said quietly, "I am not your enemy, but I will not let you destroy what we have built." The tension in the room was palpable as the faction leaders nodded reluctantly, their faces a mixture of defeat and reluctant acceptance. They had conceded, but only just. Zeyara watched them leave, her mind swirling with the complexity of the moment. She had won for now, but the war for their loyalty, for their trust, was far from over. And as she stood there, alone in the silence of the room, she realized the truth. She had not come here to lead a people who already trusted her. She had come here to earn that trust, to prove herself worthy of the title they had given her. And that, more than anything, was the true test of her power. The days following the tense meeting with Nathaniel and his faction were like a slow burn to Zeyara. The uneasy truce she had secured with Gabriel's people weighed heavily on her, and the fractures within the fragile alliance began to deepen. She spent her nights wandering the corridors of her temporary stronghold, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. For the first time in her life, Zeyara was unsure of her place in the world. She had always been confident in her power, in her ability to rule with an iron fist, to bend worlds to her will. But here, on Earth, the rules were different. These humans were not bound by the same codes of war and submission she had known. They were driven by something far more complex: hope, love, fear, trust, and betrayal. It was this fear of betrayal that lingered in the air like a dark cloud. Zeyara had fought wars, seen empires rise and fall, and witnessed countless betrayals among her own kind. But none of it had prepared her for this, the subtle, insidious kind of betrayal that thrived in the human heart, the betrayal that was born from doubt, suspicion, and fragile alliances. Her first real test came unexpectedly, in the form of a coded message delivered by one of Gabriel's closest advisors. It was brief, cryptic, and most of all, it was troubling. The message spoke of a covert meeting that had taken place between a select group of human leaders, those who had pledged loyalty to her, and a mysterious, off-world faction. Zeyara's mind immediately went to the worst case: a conspiracy, a plot to undermine her and turn the humans against her. The mere thought of it stirred a cold fury within her. She had not come to this world to be played, to be manipulated. And yet here she was, feeling like a pawn in a game she hadn't fully understood. She summoned Gabriel to her chambers that evening. She needed answers. She had to know if he was a part of this, if he had been playing her all along. When Gabriel arrived, there was something different about him. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an intensity in his eyes that Zeyara had never seen before. His posture was stiff, his hands clenched at his sides. She couldn't help but notice the unease that hung in the air between them. This was not the Gabriel she had once trusted, the one who had spoken of unity and hope for humanity. No, this man seemed like someone entirely different. "Zeyara," he began, his voice tight, "I'm glad you called me here. I think it's time we talked." Zeyara studied him, her gaze unwavering. She had been prepared for a confrontation, but she wasn't sure what kind of answer she was expecting. She had seen humans lie and deceive, but there was something about Gabriel that made her hesitate. He had been honest with her before, even when it was difficult. But could she trust him now? "I received a message," Zeyara said, her voice cold and controlled. "A message that speaks of a meeting, of betrayal. I want you to explain it to me, Gabriel. Tell me why I shouldn't believe it." Gabriel flinched, the flicker of guilt in his eyes betraying him before he could speak. "Zeyara, He stopped, swallowing hard. "You have to understand, it's not what you think." Zeyara stepped forward, her presence looming over him. "Then tell me what it is. Tell me why the people you brought me here to protect are making deals behind my back." Gabriel closed his eyes for a moment, then let out a long breath. "It's true," he admitted, his voice low. "There was a meeting, but it wasn't about betraying you. It was about ensuring the survival of humanity. We can't ignore the realities of our situation. Some of us, some of the leaders of the factions, believe that your power is growing too quickly. They fear you, Zeyara. They fear what you might do with the strength you now have." Zeyara felt a chill run through her. Fear. It was always fear that drove people to betray one another. She had seen it countless times in her own empire. Leaders who had turned on their own kind, desperate to hold on to power, afraid of losing control. But this was different. She wasn't here to conquer them. She wasn't here to destroy them. Yet, in their eyes, she had become the very thing they had feared most, a force too powerful to be controlled. "Do they think I will turn on them?" she asked, her voice steady, though the fire in her chest burned brighter with every word. "Do they believe I will destroy them when they no longer serve my purpose?" Gabriel looked at her with a mixture of sadness and regret. "No, but they believe that if they don't act now, they will lose control of the situation. They think that you'll become too powerful, too influential, and that will threaten everything we've tried to build." Zeyara took a step back, her mind racing. It wasn't just the fear of her power that had led to this betrayal. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of a future they couldn't control. They had hoped she would be a tool, a means to an end. But now they saw her as a threat. Gabriel's voice broke through her thoughts. "I didn't want this, Zeyara. I didn't want you to find out like this. But the situation is getting out of hand. There are factions among us that refuse to accept you. They see your presence as a disruption to the natural order of things. And his voice faltered, I can't control them. I can't stop them." Zeyara's mind churned as she processed his words. She had known that the road ahead would be difficult. But this was something she hadn't expected. The humans were too divided, too unstable. And now, in their desperation, they were willing to do whatever it took to maintain control, even if it meant destroying the very thing they had sought to build. "I see," she said, her voice quiet, though her words carried an undeniable weight. "So I have become the enemy now, the very thing I sought to protect." Gabriel looked away, guilt evident in his expression. "I never meant for this to happen, but I can't deny the truth anymore. You're right. They're scared, and they'll do whatever it takes to ensure that you don't have the power to tear everything apart." Zeyara felt the weight of his words sink into her bones. She had known that there would be opposition, that there would be resistance, but she hadn't realized the extent of it. She hadn't realized how deeply her presence had unsettled them, how much they feared the very power she had offered them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Zeyara stood motionless, trying to come to terms with the reality of the situation. This was not a war she had prepared for. This was not a battle of armies or weapons. It was a battle for trust, for loyalty, for survival. Finally, she broke the silence. "I came here to unite you, Gabriel. I came here to help you. But I see now that your people are not ready for that unity. You're all too fractured, too broken." Gabriel's eyes flashed with desperation. "We're not perfect, Zeyara, but we can change. We can learn. Together." Zeyara met his gaze, her eyes hard and cold. "I've seen what happens when a people refuse to change. I've seen entire civilizations crumble because they couldn't let go of their fear. If you want to survive, Gabriel, you need to choose who you truly serve. Do you serve them, or do you serve humanity?" He didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. The question hung in the air between them, too big, too complex to be answered in mere words. Zeyara turned away from him, her mind made up. There was no going back from this. She had come to Earth to lead, to unite, to help. But the time for words had passed. If these humans were truly going to survive, they would have to do it on their own, without the crutch of fear, without the crutch of betrayal. And if they couldn't rise to the challenge, Zeyara knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took to ensure that the future of this world was forged in strength, even if it meant standing alone. Zeyara stood at the edge of the balcony, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The lights flickered in the distance, a testament to the resilience of a species that had fought to survive for so long. Her thoughts churned, as they had been for weeks, wrestling with the question of what to do next. The fragile piece she had worked so hard to create was crumbling, its foundation slowly eroding beneath the weight of doubt and fear. She had always known that humanity was not a simple puzzle to solve, but she had not expected it to be so difficult, so unpredictable. The very strength she had hoped to provide had become the source of their deepest anxiety. It had been days since her confrontation with Gabriel and his faction. Since then, she had spent countless hours in meetings with the other leaders, trying to salvage what little remained of the unity she had once believed was possible. The cracks in their alliances had only deepened, and whispers of rebellion filled the air. There was a sense of urgency, a fear that seemed to be spreading faster than she could contain it. Each faction was watching the other, waiting for the slightest misstep, the smallest sign of weakness that they could exploit to tip the balance of power in their favor. Zeyara's hand clenched around the railing as she felt the familiar tug of frustration. This was not the war she had prepared for. She had come to Earth not to crush her enemies, but to help them. She had come to be a leader, not a conqueror. But as she stood there, looking out over the city, she realized the truth that had been staring her in the face all along. Leadership, true leadership, was never about simply holding power. It was about earning trust, building relationships, and making difficult choices that often came at a steep price. She had already paid that price once with the factions, and now, it seemed, there was no other choice but to pay again. A voice broke her from her reverie, and she turned to find Gabriel standing in the doorway. His expression was guarded, as it had been since their last conversation, but there was something in his eyes, something that hinted at the conflict within him. He had been distant lately, as if unsure of where he stood, or perhaps unsure of where she stood. But today, he seemed different. There was a quiet resolve in his demeanor, a weight in his shoulders that suggested he had finally come to terms with the reality they both faced. "I know you're thinking about it," Gabriel said softly, stepping closer to her. "The war, the choice, everything. It's become too much for any of us to carry alone." Zeyara didn't answer immediately. She merely watched him, trying to read his intentions. He had always been the idealist, the one who believed in the goodness of humanity, the one who had called her here to lead them to a better future. But now, there was no idealism in his eyes, only the grim realization of what had to be done. The future they had dreamed of seemed impossibly far now, a distant dream slipping further away with each passing day. "Tell me, Gabriel," Zeyara said, her voice low and measured, "how much longer do you think they'll wait? How long before they decide that we are no longer useful to them? How long before they turn on me? And on you, when they realize they can no longer control us?" Gabriel's gaze dropped, and for a moment, she could see the weight of his own doubts reflected in his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I wish I had the answers. But I can feel it too, the fear, the distrust. It's growing, and I can't stop it anymore. It's like a wildfire that no one can control." Zeyara nodded, her mind racing as she considered their options. She had always been a strategist, trained to see the bigger picture, to anticipate every move before it was made. But here, on Earth, the game was different. The rules weren't written in the cold logic of military strategy. They were written in the unpredictable, messy reality of human emotions. Fear, love, hope, betrayal. These were the forces she had to contend with now. And as much as she had once believed in her own strength, in her ability to control any situation, she had come to understand something far more complex. Power alone would not win this fight. "I'm not afraid of losing," Zeyara said finally, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "But I am afraid of losing them. Losing you." Gabriel stepped forward, his gaze intense. "You won't lose me. You never have." She turned to face him, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had been forced to carry. "I've seen what happens when you can't trust anyone," she said softly. "I've seen empires crumble under the weight of their own fear. And I'm not sure I can bear to watch the same thing happen to these people. To you." Gabriel's hand reached out, gently touching her arm. "You don't have to do this alone, Zeyara. We can find another way. We can fix this." She looked down at his hand, the warmth of his touch a stark contrast to the coldness that had taken root inside her. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of redemption, in the possibility of a future that didn't end in war. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the path forward would never be that simple. The humans were fractured beyond repair. Their fear had poisoned everything, and no amount of idealism or good intentions could undo the damage that had already been done. "I've been thinking about what you said," Zeyara continued, her voice heavy, "about how we can fix this. But I think the time has come for us to make a choice, and that choice will determine everything." Gabriel's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" Zeyara took a deep breath, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. "I think it's time for us to take control, not just of them, but of the future. We can't keep waiting for them to decide whether we are their salvation or their destruction. We can't wait for them to learn to trust us. If they won't choose peace on their own, then we will make that choice for them." The silence between them was deafening as Gabriel processed her words. He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and understanding, as if he had finally realized what she had been carrying all along, the realization that sometimes the future required sacrifices that were too heavy to bear. And sometimes those sacrifices meant taking a step into the unknown, a step that would change everything forever. "You're right," Gabriel said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "We've waited long enough. It's time to act." Zeyara nodded, her heart a storm of emotions. There was no going back now. The path they would walk from here would be fraught with danger, with uncertainty, and with the possibility of losing everything they had worked for. But she had already lost too much to be afraid of that now. The time for waiting was over. The time for action had come. As she stood there with Gabriel by her side, the weight of the decision finally settled on her shoulders. There was no more doubt, no more fear of what might happen. She had chosen her path, and now all she could do was walk it, no matter where it led, because the future was hers to shape. And if they were to survive, they would do it on their own terms, together. The wind howled across the battlefield, a relentless force that carried with it the bitter scent of dust and fire. Zeyara stood at the forefront of the human alliance's forces, her eyes narrowed as she surveyed the carnage unfolding before her. The humans had fought valiantly, but the battle was far from won. The enemy had come in waves, unrelenting, unyielding, a force as determined as it was brutal. But Zeyara had never been one to retreat, never one to back down when her enemies threatened everything she had fought for. She had learned long ago that leadership was forged not in moments of comfort, but in the crucible of battle. And now, more than ever, she understood what was at stake. The sound of blaster fire echoed across the plains, mingling with the cries of soldiers and the thundering of distant explosions. Zeyara's eyes scanned the battlefield, her gaze sweeping over the human warriors who fought alongside her. She had seen the fear in their eyes when they first began to follow her, the skepticism that had clouded their judgment. But today, in the midst of chaos and destruction, they had become something more. They had become united, a force that no one could ignore. The lessons she had taught them, lessons of unity, of strength through adversity, had taken root in their hearts. They were no longer just following her out of necessity. They were fighting for something greater, something they hadn't known they had lost until it was nearly too late. Hope. And yet, despite their courage, Zeyara could feel the weight of the decision she had made pressing down on her. She had led them here, to this point, to this war. She had promised them victory, but she knew the price would be steep. Every moment of hesitation, every moment of doubt, felt like an anchor dragging her deeper into the storm. She had not come to Earth to destroy its people. She had come to help them, to teach them. But now, with the enemy at their doorstep, the only choice left was to fight. As she moved through the ranks, her soldiers parted to make way for her, their expressions a mixture of admiration and fear. Zeyara knew that she was no longer just the alien queen they had once feared. She was something else now, a symbol of their struggle, a beacon of defiance in the face of annihilation. And yet, Beneath the armor of power she wore so easily, there was a quiet terror in her heart. Could she truly lead them to victory, or had she led them into a trap from which there was no escape? The human soldiers had already begun to rally, their resolve hardening as they took their positions for the final assault. Zeyara stood tall, her mind racing as she formulated their next move. The enemy forces were concentrated in a formation to the east, a position that would allow them to overwhelm the human alliance if they pressed forward with full force. But Zeyara knew something they didn't, something crucial. The enemy, though powerful, was vulnerable to a well-executed strike from the rear. It would take precision, speed, and an unwavering determination to break their lines. Her decision was made in an instant. She turned to the commander of the human forces, a woman named Ilara, whose face was streaked with blood and sweat, but whose eyes burned with fierce determination. Zeyara knew that Ilara had been one of the first to truly embrace her leadership, to trust her when others had not. In a way, the woman had become a mirror of her own resolve. They were not so different after all, both born of violence, both shaped by the harsh realities of the world around them. Ilara, Zeyara said, her voice firm, we strike now. Full force. We take them from behind. We break their line and leave them no escape. Ilara nodded, her lips curling into a grim smile. Yes, Your Majesty. We've been waiting for this moment. We'll follow your lead. Zeyara didn't wait for any further words. She turned back to face the battlefield, raising her weapon high, signaling the charge. The human soldiers, their weapons ready and their hearts steeled, moved in unison, advancing toward the rear of the enemy's position. Zeyara led them, her alien strength propelling her forward with a speed that left the human soldiers struggling to keep up. But it didn't matter. They were with her now, united in purpose, in their resolve to see this battle through to its end. The sound of the charge was deafening, a roar that shook the very ground beneath them. Zeyara's mind was focused, her senses sharp as she guided the soldiers through the chaos. They had one chance to get it right, one chance to break the enemy's grip on their world. There would be no second chances. There would be no retreat. As they neared the enemy's flank, Zeyara felt a surge of power rise within her, an energy that seemed to come from the earth itself. It was the feeling of leadership at its most primal, the knowledge that, in this moment, the world was hers to command. She raised her weapon and fired, a blast that tore through the enemy ranks, sending soldiers scattering in every direction. The humans behind her followed suit, their weapons unleashing a torrent of fire that ripped through the enemy's lines. The battle was chaotic, but it was exactly what Zeyara had hoped for, a chance to strike decisively, to break the enemy's spirit once and for all. But even as the tide of battle began to shift, Zeyara felt the sting of loss. For every enemy that fell, another human soldier took their place. She watched as Ilara led her troops forward, her face a mask of fury and determination. And yet, in the midst of the fighting, Zeyara knew that this battle was only the beginning. It was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future, a future where humanity would have to stand on its own, without the crutch of fear or division that had held them back for so long. The hours passed in a blur. Zeyara's soldiers fought with a ferocity she had never seen before, each strike driven by the promise of a new world, one that was free from the shackles of their past. And with every passing minute, she saw the transformation in them. The fear that had once defined their existence was gone, replaced by something far stronger: hope, unity, and the unshakable belief that they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable. By the time the sun began to set, the battlefield was littered with the fallen, both human and enemy alike. Zeyara stood at the center of the field, her breath heavy and her body battered, but her spirit unbroken. She had led them to victory, but the price had been high. The battlefield was silent now, save for the distant cries of the wounded and the mournful wind that swept across the land. And in the quiet, Zeyara understood something profound: that the true battle had never been about winning or losing. It had been about something deeper, something that transcended war itself. She had come to Earth to help them. She had come to teach them. But in the end, they had taught her something far more valuable. What it meant to truly lead, not through fear or dominance, but through unity, through sacrifice, and through love. And as she looked out over the field, watching her soldiers tend to the wounded, she realized that she had done it. She had not just saved humanity. She had saved herself. For in this moment, she was not just an alien queen. She was their mother, their protector, their leader. And the future, for the first time, seemed possible.